Hi, you guys. Welcome back to the Piece of Us podcast. I am Aaron. I am joined today by my beautiful wife, Crystal.
Hi, everyone.
We're also joined by Michelle Lemus. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you for having me.
I'm super excited for our podcast today. We are going to be talking about one of our greatest passions. It has blessed our lives so much, and that is adoption.
Yes. I feel like adoption, I didn't realize how much adoption affects so many people's lives. And it wasn't until we started actually doing foster care and adoption and all of that that all of a sudden, like neighbors, people down the street, like so many people are like, oh my gosh, like I wanted to adopt, or I know someone who was adopted, or it just, yeah, is so big out there. And so I think it's such an important topic to talk about all the angles of it and all the different things that come from it.
It's always shocking to me. I was in a store the other day, and I don't know why or what store, I don't remember, but they had asked me, a little bit about myself, and I was like, "Oh, what do I do?" And I've adopted, so many kids, and they were like, "Oh, I'm adopted." Oh, I was getting my hair cut. That's what it was.
Oh,
And she's like,
haircut.
"I'm adopted," and she started telling me all about her story, and it was great because, once you know that person's been involved in adoption in some way or another, then you suddenly have this instant connection with them.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's so
And
true.
I love that. So Michelle joins us today. And Michelle, would you give us a little information about your adoptions?
I sure can. For many, many years growing up, I always thought I was going to have the perfect, marriage, then many children. But that just didn't happen. I didn't find the right person to start a family with. And I knew I always wanted to have children. And I swear one day I must have been maybe 14. I had a vision, and I swear it was a higher power that says, your children are in China. And from that day on, I knew that that's where my children were going to come from. And I dated several other people. And when I did mention that adoption was going to be in my future, some of them didn't agree with it at all. And they were shooed out the door very, very quickly because I just knew that's where my babies were. So I adopted as a single mom and traveled to China twice. The first time was 2003. It was December to January. And my daughter was in an orphanage in Hunan, China. And my dad traveled with me to China, and we had the most amazing experience while we were there. Kylie bounded, sorry, Kylie bonded very, very quickly. She was in an orphanage that had been run by Americans. So those babies were held and rocked and fed when they needed to be fed. And there was no difficulty in us connecting immediately. We were able to travel to the Great Wall, to the Forbidden City. It was just a fabulous, fabulous trip. And once I brought Kylie home, I mean, she was just a spectacular child, just beautiful and smart. And I mean, I paraded around with her everywhere. I don't think I left her until I had to start back to work again. But I knew I was going to have two children. So I put the paperwork in quickly because it was taking about 2 to 3 years at that point to receive a child from China. And it didn't happen, and it didn't happen. And I had to keep renewing my paperwork. And every time you renew your paperwork, it's a higher expense. And finally, the woman at my agency said, have you ever thought about adopting a special needs child? And I'm like, well, I really hadn't because I'm a single parent. I have another daughter at home, and depending on what medical needs this child might have had, it could turn our household, upside down. And being a single parent, that's not always easy, although I had a lot of support from family and friends. And they're like, no, 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 it's sometimes it's not even that serious. Sometimes it's just asthma or eczema. I'm like, oh, all right, then sounds like a no-brainer to me. So I was put on that list, and I heard probably 2 months after that, and Kylie was 5 at the time, that there was a child, and her picture came across the screen, and I went, that's my child. I didn't know what medical needs she had. Didn't matter at that point because when I saw that face, I knew she was mine. Come to find out, her only medical condition at the time was that she had a boil the size of a grapefruit on the back of her head. that had been cut off and removed in China. And that was because finding out later that she slept on a wooden board and was left on her back for hours at a time. So when we made that trip, both of my parents came and Kylie came also. And the child was, Malin grieved horribly. I mean, she was shut down. Her lower lip was sucked in. She cried when I held her. She cried when I put her down. She just cried and cried and cried and cried. And I had to take it slow. It wasn't like the first adoption. And I'm like, I want to go here. I want to go here. And I want to do this with her. But her system just could not handle that. So brought her home. And like I said, it took a lot of learning to figure out this poor baby. And come to find out, it wasn't until she was about 3 where I saw behaviors coming out, aggressive behaviors, pinching, hitting, and the tantrums she had where she wasn't even in her body. Her eyes would just get real big and vacant. And I reached out to many, many people and I'm like, I don't understand what's going on. I'm parenting her the same way I did Kylie. And it was hard. It was really hard. And it wasn't until she was about 6 years old that I found a trauma therapist. And she opened up a whole new world for both of us because I never even had heard of pre-verbal developmental trauma. And that's a word that most people aren't familiar with because a mother carrying a child that she knows she's going to have to give up and leave, that baby in utero already has that stress in their body and their nervous system is totally out of whack. And then she's abandoned and left at a school and then taken into an orphanage where her needs weren't met at all. And then she had to have surgery. I don't know whether or not she was in a hospital or if they just used tools that they had in the orphanage to take care of that. So it was a different story and I had a lot to learn. But thank goodness for our trauma therapist that we had. She opened up a whole new world for us. And Malin's now 15 and doing exceptionally well. So
I love that. I mean, I love that you got her the help early that she needed. And I think that you touched on something really huge is when we would have kids come in from foster care and different things, they would be like, oh, well, they were so young when it happened, they won't remember and it should be fine. But like you said, trauma can start at a really age, even in when they're still in, mother. And so what touch a little bit or explain a little bit more on what the trauma therapist said about those traumas prior to them actually remembering, because it could be your subconscious.
At that point, I didn't even know what trauma was. I really feel that they did not prepare me in any of the courses that I ever took on trauma. It's bigger now. People are understanding it more now. But when I went over, I had no idea that this could affect a baby as much as it did. She didn't come home till she was 2. So she spent 2 years in that condition. And the brain develops mostly within the first 3 years of life. So her experiences in that orphanage set her nervous system and her brain on a whole different route. It was interesting because most people wouldn't have known it because she saved those behaviors for me, the safe person in her life. So when she was at daycare, when she was at dance, or when she was with any other person but me, everyone's like, oh my goodness, she's so adorable and she's so wonderful. And they would never believe that my house was torn to pieces one day and that I was hit and kicked and punched and by a child because I thought all the love in my heart in the world and from all her entire family and friends would be enough to heal that part of her. And it just wasn't. So once I went to the trauma therapist, she educated me. And we worked a lot on attachment because she didn't have a strong attachment, didn't want a strong attachment. She was afraid I was going to walk out and leave her. So she taught me all about the brain and what happens to her brain and the amygdala and the hippocampus. and taught me how to parent differently through a trauma lens. And I had to be a detective. So behind every behavior is something that she's trying to tell me. And for a lot of people on the outside, they don't understand that. They're like, "What do you mean? She's, kicking the door, throwing herself on the ground, and can't you give her consequences?" And I have to parent her much differently than I did Kylie. Kylie didn't have, she had some trauma because she was abandoned. So there is trauma there, but it was a different kind. It didn't affect her as much because she bonded so quickly.
So a few things that you said that really stuck out to me that I like that you touched on was that those behaviors, there's something behind every behavior. And I think that is especially the case in a trauma child or someone that's been through trauma. But even if you haven't, a lot of times kids miscue all the time. And they'll have one behavior, but it means something completely different than what the behavior's matching. And like you said, a lot of people from the outside are like, why aren't you parenting them? And we get that on our channel all the time. Like, why didn't you step in and parent? Usually I always turn off the camera and parent separately because it's not something obviously that you film. But I'm like, you don't understand what's going on the back end. You don't understand why they walked in on it, and were showing a bad mood or acted this way. It was something to do with something completely different.
And I find that when she's going through those moments, I can't even address discipline at that point. Right there, it's just to make her safe and connected. That's the TRBI. Parenting is just to be safe and connected. Then later, you can revisit what happened and if there should be a consequence. But most of the time, once she's regulated, she understands what happened. But to take something away, she's had the biggest thing in her life taken away. She had her birth parents taken away. She had her country taken away. So to her, if I took away a phone, so what? So what? You took away my phone. It's minute compared to what the loss was that she had. You had touched upon something with the therapist. Ugh, I don't even remember, but she taught me how to be a detective and look at those behaviors and see what it was underlying. She gave me a place that I could talk to somebody that understood. That was the most discouraging part because I didn't have anybody for me. And luckily enough, I was able to use the same therapist as Maylin because she understood Maylin. So she would understand where I was coming from. And if I had had a rough day, I could just pick up the phone and have her just listen because you feel really alone in that process. Especially because most people didn't see it or understand it or would say you should be doing this or you should be doing that. I'm like, no, I shouldn't. This is what I should be doing, but it's going to take a lot of work. It took probably up until fourth grade where she felt safe enough to ask for help in school, at home. She wouldn't ask for help. She would just shut down. Still to this day, I still make her breakfast and bring it to her. I still make her dinner. She's very capable of doing it, but that's still that piece that she needs from me that I'm going to take care of her. I'm not going to walk out. And just having to realize triggers because the body keeps the score. So some things that I wouldn't even have thought would have triggered her or her teachers wouldn't have thought triggered her. She came home one day and she was acting out. It was third grade, acting out. And I am like, what is going on? And finally, I understood that they were reading a book because of Winn-Dixie. And in that book, the mother walks out on her child. And the mother actually had blonde, curly hair and blue eyes. And she took that as what happened to her, or I was going to do that to her. So luckily, in therapy, we were able to uncover it. And then we read the book and she processed it in therapy. But if teachers aren't aware of these things, it can it can be really, really difficult. In fact, at school the other day, I'm reading a book and I hadn't read it yet. It was one in our new curriculum that we had to read. And I started reading it and I'm like, I am not reading this book because right away it's about a little boy who was evicted from his home. And I have a child in my class who was evicted from his home. Now, any other teacher probably would have just kept reading that book. And I looked at the kids and I went, I'm mad at this book. I'm not reading it. And I explained to them why. And I didn't say the evicted part, but I said, well, there's something in people's body that if something happened to them, like let's say they got into a really bad car accident, and then in the book, this person got into a really bad accident, and in their body, it stirs things up like, oh my goodness, that happened to me and it was awful. And so those triggers can come up. And I don't like the way the book has some information information in here that could trigger some of our friends. So every time they walk by it, they're like, we're mad at that book. We're not reading that book. But that's because I know what I know. Other teachers could pick it up and be like, what's the big deal? So you get a new mindset once you parent a child with trauma and you learn about it. It opens up a whole new world.
Right, because there's so many triggers and things out there that you don't really understand unless you've gone through it. And I feel like, wait, what grade do you teach?
I teach second grade.
Second grade. That's amazing.
It's a beautiful grade. It really is. I've done several staff development pieces at my school and in our town, educating other teachers about being a trauma informed classroom. I mean, I don't know if you can see, but I don't have any of my overhead lights on in my classroom. I've got a lot of soft seating, flexible seating, places where they can regulate themselves, a calming corner, just so that when I know it's too much, they've got a place. And I have a little boy this year who has never ever been in a classroom. This is his first year that he's able to stay in a classroom all day.
Oh, that's incredible.
And it's because he feels safe. He knows he's got a place where people love him. And if he can't do something at that time, not a big deal. We can do it later. So I think I've improved
We need
I
more
think I've
teachers
always
like
been a
you.
good teacher, but I think I'm even a better teacher from what I've learned because I can help other students and educators. And that's
I
very
love,
important to me. Very
oh,
important to me because
you're
when my own
incredible.
children in their school, something I'm still advocating for her and she's wonderfully behaved at school, but there are, homework is a trigger. She's exhausted. She has given 110% all day at school. So when she comes home, she just needs to decompress. And I really don't care about homework, to be honest. I don't think it serves any real purpose. So I tell them that I'm like, if you want her to do two problems, she'll do two, but she's not going to do 5 pages. She just does not have it in her anymore. So I still have to be her biggest advocate and always will be. So, as you know,
Yes. Oh my gosh, so many things that you're saying. I'm just like, yes, I can relate to that. You get it. And I love how connected you are. One of the other things that was an eye opener to me is they don't teach you enough, like you kind of touched on when you're going through these classes, when you're getting ready to adopt or bring kids in your homes who have been through trauma. They just teach you like the basics of like adoption and this and that, but they just scratch the surface of what really needs to happen and go on in the homes. And I love that you sought out help for you too, because a lot of parents will come in and they're like, well, nothing's wrong with me, everything's wrong with them. They're the ones with the problems, they're the ones with the behaviors. And a lot of people will tend to blame the child and not realize that they're parenting or maybe the book they're reading to them or maybe something they're doing is triggering those things. And we need help too as parents. We need to seek out therapy if we need it, or no matter what we're going through. I love that you saw a therapist too and learned how to parent a child who's been through trauma. So I think that's so huge and so important because it's so easy to blame the person with the behaviors and not realize the environment.
I think that's I think that's really an encouraging thing for a lot of parents that are watching this podcast is the fact that you're a teacher, so you went through a ton of training, to become a teacher, and then anything you went through to become licensed to adopt, and even then you still didn't have all of the tools and stuff. So it's just super encouraging to see somebody who has been through so much training and you still weren't set up for handling certain things. But it's awesome that you were able to go out and find somebody to help you and learn, those tools to do
she was
that.
unbelievable. We cried big crocodile tears when she left. She got her PhD and went to work in Utah as a professor and a researcher for trauma. So, but we were with her for about 4 years.
Oh,
4 years.
wow.
That's
And we couldn't
awesome.
find anybody after her. She doesn't need it as much anymore. And I've kind of a lot of podcasts out there now and adoption groups really have helped too. You can get great resources from them that help you also. So I didn't feel as much alone as she was growing. So
Do you have a couple that you could recommend to us that we could link if our viewers would like
the
to check them out?
podcasts,
Yeah.
yes, I can find that right here. Honestly, adoption, one of my favorites. The Adoption Connection, Connected Parenting, Empowered Parent Podcast, and the TBRI podcast. All of those have great information. And I've actually sent some of the podcasts directly to Maylin's teachers. I'm like, just listen. It's so hard for me to understand because you look at her and you're like, there's nothing wrong with this kid. There's absolutely nothing wrong. What are you talking about? And I said, this is it. This is, if you make a sarcastic joke or you say something, if she says, I need help, I don't understand it, and you say, oh, come on, it's so easy, bam, she's done. She has
Bam.
just turned
Yeah.
right off because she goes right into that flight fright mode. I need help. Even if she knows, and I keep telling them, even if you think she knows it and it's so simple, just care for her. Say, okay, I'm right here for you. What do you got? Let's go over it together. And you might only have to do that for 2 minutes and she'll be fine. But she needs to know that she has somebody in her corner. Relationships
Right.
are the biggest healer of the brain. And that's what I've learned through therapy too, that the more positive relationships a child has, the quicker they're going to be healed. So it could be one teacher, could be one coach, could be one friend, and that will make a world of difference in that child's life. So
I love
relationships,
that.
connection has to be there.
Right. And I think people don't realize kind of what you just said too, as far as like even one sarcastic remark can set that relationship back quite a few steps. And it's like you made all this ground, and then if you start being sarcastic or you made a rude remark or you hurt that relationship in some way, you're now back 20 steps and you're trying to build back. So
And
be
this was a
very
child
careful
that
on
couldn't read
sarcasm.
emotions, even on a face, because she never had a mom looking at her and being like, oh, you're okay. Hi, sweetheart. And bouncing off each other's facial expressions when she was an infant. So when she came home, I could just have like a regular face and she'd be like, you're mad. You're mad. I'm like, no, honey, I'm not mad, but you're not smiling. And so you had to reteach. We had to play many, many games of just being able to read body language and read a face because she couldn't do that. She didn't have those skills.
They say is what 90% of what you say is through your body language. So that's huge to be able to read that and
Yes.
understand emotions.
Yep. What I found else very interesting was didn't just affect my youngest and myself, but I had another daughter at home. So that was heart wrenching for me because I would have to be dealing with these big, big behaviors. And then here's my 11-year-old going to her room and shutting the door and hearing awful things being said from her younger sibling to me, who she cared about so deeply. And I couldn't go to her yet to comfort her because I had a crisis on my hands at home. And that part can still bring me to tears. And I would always go in afterwards. I'm like, are you okay? I know she was safe because she was in her room, but just hearing and living that had to been awful, awful for her. And we have also gone to counseling.
That's tough. That's
It is really tough. And we've experienced that a lot in our house where, yeah, when a new child comes in or kids having different behaviors, how it affects the other children in the home to see and experience. At this point, our kids have been through and understand behaviors and understand those emotions. And so, in a lot of ways, they can relate usually to them. But yeah, it's really interesting to see that dynamic unfold. And like you said, making sure you're checking in with them and making sure that they understand, and having kids come in with different behaviors and different things. Like a lot of times you are so focused on them because of that crisis, but at the same time it's so important to check in on the other kids and how are you doing and how'd that make you feel. And on our house at this point, our kids are very used to emotions and understand the behaviors and why the different things happen and all of that. But it's really cool to see the kids become very informed. Like you said, getting them help or therapy or different things so that they can process too, and then they become informed and get those tools that they can take into their future on self-advocating and regulating their emotions, or if they're working with a coworker that's having a hard time. Like, it's been so incredible as our kids have gotten older to see those relationships play out in other ways in their lives. And it's really cool to see. I don't know. I think it's been a really good thing,
It
even though it's hard in the moment.
it's really shocking to me because we have had a lot of kids in our home. How you think that this kid is in a great place, they've been with you for many years, and then we have this new kid come in and they're struggling with this particular trauma. And in helping that child deal with that trauma, we come to find out this other kid has been struggling with the same trauma, and so we're able to help both of them to get over whatever happened for both of them separately in their past. But it's a very similar way of dealing with it for both of them, and it's happened so many times in our house. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Did you feel split sometimes too? Like, I want to be with them and help them through that, but I got to be over here and help them with this. And I felt torn so many days. I just felt torn.
Yes, I think it's very easy as parents to feel torn between things and between, oh, do I help this kid in this moment? But I know this one's needing something, and I know, you know what I mean? All of that. And it's just kind of trying to do the best that we could possibly do, because I think some days are obviously a lot harder than others. But yeah, it can be a
I,
process
I
to,
give you the biggest props, Michelle, because you're able to do this as a single mom. I
yes.
think that's helped with Crystal and I is because there is two of us. So sometimes, we can divide and conquer, but for you, that hasn't always been a possibility. So
No. And usually, if I would ask for help, everybody would want to take Kylie. They want to take my oldest daughter because, oh, we're going to make sure she's okay and she gets this and she gets that. And part of me inside was like, I just need you to take my youngest. I need time away from her. But if I had time away from her, I'd pay when I got back because then it was triggered all again. You left me for a little while, even if it was for 4 hours, I could come back and, she'd be great for the people that were with her. But then when I came back, it would start up all over again because, well, you left, even if you left for 4 hours, it's you left. So it was just so tricky when people were like, well, just take care of yourself. Just go here, go there. I'm like, it's not that simple. She only, I have to be there to meet her needs. And um, it was exhausting. It was exhausting. I look back and working full time as a teacher and getting to all the therapy that we needed to get. I mean, she's worth every moment, every penny. Um, but it's a lot. And I encourage people who are out there to find a trauma informed therapist, not just a therapist. It has to be a trauma informed therapist because they just understand these kids so much better than a regular therapist. They just have different training, um, different kind of compassion. So I just reach out, don't wait. Because for so long, people are like, does she have rad? Does she have this? And I'm like, it's not rad, but what is it? So, there are similarities between rad, but I mean, my heart goes out to those parents because I know how tough preverbal complex trauma was. I can't even imagine a parent living with a child with rad. That's just got to be so difficult.
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know what RAD is, it's what is it? Reactive attachment disorder. Yes. And it's basically where a child has can't bond or attach properly to their caregiver, to their parent. And it is a really, really hard thing. We have had a couple of kids who have had RAD, and they were just foster children that, eventually got placed with grandparents or back to parents. But it was really difficult. And it's hard when you don't have those, like you said, when you created a relationship, it heals. And what about a kid who can't create that relationship? And so it's a whole other, make sure you get into a trauma therapist if you're going through it or have a child that has that, because you definitely need help and the resources to, help them as much as possible with that.
And if you are thinking about adopting out there, please, please read up on trauma before you bring this child home.
Yeah.
Will just help you so much. Um, Knowing some of the characteristics and how to parent this child a little bit differently than you would a neurotypical child. Um, because it's hard. It's really hard.
And it's interesting too, even just in our own house, like because we have kids obviously with different backgrounds and different pasts and all of that. And we've had to tailor our parenting on an individual level. And like you could parent your older daughter one way, your younger daughter another way. And it's like you have to figure out what works for that child in particular. And even listening to these podcasts or, listening to parents out there, make sure that it's the right for your child, because what's right for one child might not be right for the next child, and it's getting it all figured out. One other quick thing I wanted to touch base on that you had talked about a little bit earlier, but you had said that she was good everywhere else, but when she was home and felt safe is when you saw these behaviors coming out. And I think there's so many times we had taken a class, and one of the subjects in the class was talking about like parents who have gone through a divorce, and one parent they're really really good for at their house, and then one parent they struggle and have all these crazy behaviors, and one parent blames the other one, well they're good for me, and the other one's like, well they're a struggle for me, and you're going through this. And what they talked about in the class is the one where they have the most behaviors in and are having the hardest time is actually the parent they're feeling safest with.
Exactly. It's so hard to understand that, but it is.
And it blew my mind when I heard that, because I was like, no, you would think that they just didn't know how to parent them right. And that's not the case. It's not. So if you're seeing a lot of behaviors or you're going through that, know that you're safe for your child and they feel okay to be able to let those emotions out, and they're expecting you to help them regulate and help them work through those emotions. That's why it's coming out as, oh my gosh, why are they so bad for me? It's not that at all.
Right. And it was interesting because we did neurofeedback also, and they actually did an EKG of her brain. And it was fascinating to see the inside of her brain and the frontal lobe, bright red strawberry. And that's a brain of a trauma brain. So you could actually see her brains and the colors in her brains and how they're different from a child that has experienced all the love and attention and that they deserve. So that was really interesting. And then we also did EMDR, and that was interesting too because it goes into her subconscious. So she had to watch a puppet on a finger, and it's the eye movement going back and forth and back and forth. And she would say things, and at one point she's like, knife, white coats, and I'm like, oh, it really it brought me to tears because I know that she had that big boil cut off of her head, and I'm like, "Oh my goodness, was she not even in a hospital?" Because she was petrified of dentists when we came home because of the white clothing, and I'm like and my therapist was like, "Well, try not to read into it." Exactly, it might not be because it's a subconscious that's coming out. You'll never truly know, but as a parent hearing that, I mean, I just broke down in tears. I was like, my poor baby. If I could have been there the day you were born and took you right then and there, I would have, but it was out of my control.
Oh my
But I'm here now,
gosh,
and that's what
that's
matters.
crazy for sure. Real quick, international adoption. How was that process? I know you said it 2 to 3 years, but what was the certification like, and how would someone go about doing that?
Well, China's really slowed down their program because now they're having their own citizens of China adopt within their country. So there's still a lot of waiting children. So they're a little bit older with special needs that are still available for adoption. I believe it's kind of the same system I went through where you have to have a lot of interviews with social workers and get cleared, police clearance, FBI clearance, a lot of paperwork, and just wait until they've matched you with a child. And you can say yes or no if you feel that that child isn't the best fit for you, as much as you can tell from paperwork and a picture. But it's a lot quicker to do a waiting child than it was to be on regular list. Now, back in 2002, there were a ton of babies that were left in the orphanages, primarily girls at that time. So the wait for Kylie was only about 8 months. So it only took 8 months to get her home. And then for Maylin, on the regular wait or the regular list, it was like 4 years, and it still wasn't moving. And that's when I went over to the waiting child. And there really wasn't anything wrong with her except for, the boil on her head. But the name they called it, I was like, "Ooh, I don't know what this is." But I brought it to the pediatrician. He's like, "It all means that she had a boil and they cut it out of her head. Go get your baby." So it was nothing serious. So thank goodness. But I'm not really sure. I haven't really been following the adoption world in China right now, so I'm not sure what the wait time is anymore. International adoption had really slowed down for a while.
Yeah, because of COVID and all of that going on. And I know in the States, at least in Arizona, adoption, so roughly it takes 6 months to get certified, go through all because you have to go through classes and all of that process. And then if you're going to do foster care, literally within probably a day or two of being actual licensed, they are calling you with names. So it's usually really fast. But those ones are foster care. So a lot of times they will end up going back to parents. The plan is always reunification, with those. But to adopt a child has to be in your house for 6 months prior to an adoption date. So
that's my other vision that I've been hearing in my head lately, that I would love to take in an infant, but only for a few days because I'd get too attached and I wouldn't be able to give the baby up. But I would love to be able to foster a baby for just a couple of days till they get to their next foster home and just love that baby and give it all that it needs for, as long as they need it for. But that's been in the back of my head now that my kids are getting older.
well, it's an incredible thing. And you're such an incredible person. I really commend you for all the work you do and your teaching and being so informed and just helping and touching so many lives. We really appreciate you coming on the podcast and being a part of this and sharing your story. It's definitely going to help a lot of people.
I think I could sit around a table with you guys and talk for a long time. I think we have a lot of things that we have in common.
Oh, I would love that. Where are you from again?
Okay, I have to go though because they're calling announcements here.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so
Michelle.
much.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
All right, bye.
It was so awesome talking to Michelle today. Her story is wow.
Oh my gosh.
So
and I can relate to
inspiring.
so many things that I'm like, yes, because it's hard to I don't know, find people that get it, that have I don't know, you know what I mean?
To go through adoption, especially an international adoption as a single parent, wow. I'm just her strength and she sounds like an amazing teacher too.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I really wish she was here and could teach our kids. 'Cause we've not always had the best teachers, but I want to thank Michelle so much for joining us and telling us her experience with adoption and with trauma therapy for her daughters. Really appreciated all of her input today and hope you guys learned something. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I definitely learned a lot just listening to her, and I just really appreciate and love you, Michelle. Hopefully we can meet in person someday.
That would be amazing. All right, you guys, I want to thank you so much for joining us today on Piece of Us Podcast. We will catch you guys on the next one. Peace.